Howdy folks, welcome to Katie Phillips Scrapbook Designs. I'm Katie and today we're not doing any particular mini album. Today we're going to talk specifically about how to construct a mini album cover. For this video, I'm going to go into a little more detail than I normally do when constructing a mini album cover, so that for future covers, I can just do a process video and link to this and provide a little bit more in-depth explanation into what all is involved in planning a cover and building a cover. So before I make the first cut, I have to determine how big of a cover I need for the album. And I usually start that by figuring out what size of photograph I want the album to hold. So what's the largest photograph that I want to put in the album? And a lot of times it's 4x6. So we're going to assume a base page size of 4.5 by 6.5 of usable space. And that gives enough room for a 1/4 inch mat all the way around, plus a 1/4 inch of the page all the way around. And on top of that, the way I do my pages, I usually have a 1/4 inch gussets. So the width of the album is going to be 4.5 inches plus the 1/4 inch gusset, plus another 1/4 inch for just a little gap around the edge of the album. The height is going to be the height of the page plus a 1/2 inch, so that I can have a 1/4 inch on top and a 1/4 inch on the bottom. So the overall footprint for an album, the album that I have in mind, at least for this project, is going to be 5 by 7. So we know that the front and back covers are going to be 5 by 7. Now we need to figure out how big the spine is going to be. And that's going to depend on how many fins or signatures you're going to have and how chunky each one of them is going to be. A good rule of thumb is a 1/2 inch per fin or signature. And the way to calculate that is to take the number of signatures that you want, add 1, and then multiply by whatever that gusset width is. So this is going to be a 3 signature album. So we start with 3 signatures, add 1, so that's 4. And I want 1/2 inch gussets, so times 0.5, that's 2 inches. So the spine needs to be 2 inches wide and 7 inches tall, just like the rest of the album. So we're going to go ahead and start cutting the chipboard. First, we're going to make a cut at 7 inches. Hopefully this is in focus. So we're going to start with making a cut at 7 inches. We're going to save this piece. Now we're going to make a cut at 5 inches. And since this is a 12 by 12 piece, we're going to make another cut at 5 inches, and that's going to leave us a 2 inch piece. Yep, 2 inches. Now we need to calculate the size of the wrap that we need. And we do that by measuring the entire distance of, or the entire width of the album pieces when laid out side to side. In this case, it's 12 inches. We need to add 1 inch for each side, so that comes to 14 inches, plus about a 1/2 inch, a 1/4 inch for each gap. So if you had a multi-spine piece, then you'd need to add another 1/4 inch. So in this case, we're only going to have 2 gaps, so that's going to come to 1/2 inch. So we need a wrap of 14.5 inches wide, and the height ideally would be the height of the piece plus an inch on each side. So 2 inches, that would be 9 inches. And since I'm working with 8.5 by 11, I'm going to skimp on that extra ½ inch. And instead of having an inch on each side, I'm just going to work with 1/4 inch. It's doable, not ideal, but definitely doable. If you're working with 12 by 12 cardstock, then you're going to want the 9 inches. But our paper is not 14 inches wide or 14.5 inches wide. It's 11 inches wide. So we're going to have to piece a couple of pieces together. So we're going to set the cardstock or chipboard aside for a moment. We need 2 pieces of 65-pound cardstock to adhere 2 pages together. I'm going to take double-sided tape and go along the very edge of one of the pages. And burnish that down real good. And then I like to follow that up with a narrow line of liquid glue for extra security. Especially if this seam ends up being close to a joint or a stress point, you're going to want the additional security of having liquid glue. Okay. Now you're going to pry up just one edge, one tip of the release paper. And take the second piece of paper and fit it down, get it aligned where you want it. Make sure it's good and straight. And press down up here where the double-sided tape is exposed. We're going to pull that out and grab the rest of the double-sided release paper and pull that free and burnish that down real good. Now, if you have a smaller album, you can skip this step. The next thing is to add the chipboard to the wrap. And you're going to start with laying it out. Kind of want to see where everything ends up, because I'm monitoring where this seam ends up, and having it kind of in the middle of the back or front is fine. It'll probably be the back. Having it in the middle there is fine. Where you don't want it is here in the middle of this gap between the spine and the back cover. And you don't want it real close to that gap either, because there's going to be a lot of stress on the paper at that point, and you don't want it to be where that seam is. But this is going to work out pretty good, I think. So I'm going to add double-sided tape all the way around all 3 of these pieces and burnish that tape down. I will be right back. You may notice as you're burnishing that there's a subtle color change to the release paper, and that means that all the air bubbles between the release paper and the adhesive and the chipboard have been forced out. And you want that. Before I start adhering it down, I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to start adding some double-sided tape to what's going to end up being the inside face of all three of these pieces. However, on the verticals, I'm only going to come down about 3/4 of an inch instead of going the full length. And the reason for that is that that's where the fold over is going to be. And I'll explain that a little bit more when we get to that point in the process. Again, we're going to burnish this down, and if you have a situation like right there where a bit of the chipboard came up, you can always glue it down if you're concerned about it. Alright, so I'm going to eyeball about an inch from the left side and centered it from top and bottom. And we're going to add liquid glue to give it a little bit more strength, a little bit better adhesion. And the reason I do the double-sided tape all the way around the edge is so that I've got grip right up there at the edge, which is where album covers tend to bubble. And by adding double-sided tape right there, that helps prevent the bubbling. Again, we're about an inch from the left, centered top and bottom. And I'm going to burnish that down. Squish that glue there real good. Make sure that double-sided tape gets pressed down real good. Now we're going to add glue to the spine. And before we start pulling double-sided tape, I'm going to put a ruler up here on the bottom of the piece that I've got glued down here. And I've got it all the way to the 0 mark here. I'm going to pull double-sided tape. Get that lined up good. Now we're going to align this corner here with the 5 1/4 inch mark. So 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the last piece. And this helps keep the bottom straight and make sure that you've got a good gap right there. You could go about 1/8 of an inch closer if you want to. If you get it too close, your album cover wrap will start to crack whenever you open and close it. If you'd like to see more about cover mistakes and how to avoid them, check out my video on 5 mini album cover mistakes. I'm going to link it somewhere up here. Right, for the back, I'm going to add more glue. And we're going to pull the release paper. And again, we're going to line our ruler up with the bottom. The left lower corner is aligned with the 0 mark. The right lower corner of our spine is at the 7 1/4 inch mark. So we're going to go another 1/4 of an inch out. We're going to align the left lower corner of the back with the 7 1/2 inch mark. And we're going to use the ruler as a guide to keep the bottom level. And press down. And squish that glue down real good. Make sure that double-sided tape is burnished all the way around. This double-sided tape is definitely well burnished. And now, because we use the ruler here along the bottom, the album is level all across the bottom, and it should be level all the way across the top. Okay, so we've got all this extra paper over here. We need to trim that off. You can just take a pair of scissors and eyeball about 1 inch away and cut. And set this aside because there will probably be at some point in the project where you want to use this. If you don't have that much excess, then you can skip this step. You don't necessarily need to cut that off. Now we're going to start bending this excess over and doing the wrapping part of the cover album wrap. So I'm just slowly bending this top section over the top. I'm going to go in with my folding tool and give it a nice crisp edge. If you have 1/8 inch tape, you could probably run a strip of 1/8 inch tape right here down the center in this gap. Since this gap is 1/4 of an inch wide, there's plenty of room for that, and use that to help catch this piece as well as the interior cover wrap. Go over to the right edge, turn that over, get a good crease on this. Now the bottom. And the left side. This next step is very important. If you mess it up, there are ways to overcome it. We're going to do a shallow miter on these corners. And by that, a straight miter would be to go straight across, which I frequently do for pockets and stuff like that. But for corner wraps, we don't want to go straight across because you could end up with a situation where you've got a gap right here where the chipboard's not covered. Instead of going at a 45-degree angle from this score line, we're going to come in at more like a 30-degree angle from that score line. And we're also not going to cut all the way up to this corner here. We're going to cut more or less to right here, which is about 1/8 of an inch away. And then we're going to repeat that, only we're going about like a 30-degree angle from this score line. And we're going to repeat that for all 4 corners. Now, you don't want to toss these because if you mess up and cut it a little too close, one thing that you can do is you can place this corner piece over the top here and then fold down and cover up the mistake. So I'm going to set these aside just in case we need them. I don't think we're going to, but you never know. And grab some glue. Start pulling the release paper off. Fold it over and press down. And I find that it usually helps me to burnish as I go. And now we're going to repeat that on the bottom. So you don't want to be stingy with the glue on this, but you don't want to get huge globs of glue up near this edge. If you do, it's just going to squish out. Like it did here and here. It's going to end up on your tool and on your hands and kind of get a little messy. And you could end up with globs of glue on your project in places where you don't want it, and those tend to attract dirt. So they can look very smudgy. Again, we're going to press down, burnish as we go. All right, now we're going to add double-sided tape to the verticals. Here in the center, we're going to come about 1/8 of an inch away from the bottom and run it to about 1/8 of an inch away from the top. And burnish it down. Because I've got adhesive exposed right here, that's why I didn't go all the way up to the top over here. All right, now we're going to add glue to the left side flap. Before we pull the release tape and fold it over, we're going to tuck these corners. So I'm going to take my bone folder tool and I'm going to come in from this angle, this side that's already folded down, and just round that in and press down. And I'm going to do that on the other side as well. And what this does is it prevents this little corner here from sticking out at a weird angle. Makes it a nice, neat little corner. Pull up the release paper and fold that over. Make sure it folds over on top of where we pressed that corner down. Let's see if I can get one where you can really tell it has been tucked. I think this one you can really see it. Hopefully that'll come out on video. And we're going to tuck the other side. Add glue. Pull the release paper and fold this over. Burnish down. Okay, now we have the wrap done. We still need to do the interior liner. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to flex this. Just kind of gently fold it closed. See what I mean about glue getting all over everything? Got little glue blobs on the outside of the album. Okay, we don't have any cracking, which is a really good thing, and that's because there is plenty of room here between the spine and the two cover pieces for the paper to flex. So now we're going to add the interior liner. To calculate the interior liner piece, there's a couple ways that you can do it. You can do a multi-piece liner, or you can do a single piece liner. To do a single piece liner, you're going to need an album that is narrower than this. Depending on how big of a gap you want all the way around the edge. If you're okay with having 1/8 of an inch all the way around, see this is 14.5 inches to 12.5 inches. Yeah, you could go with a 12 inch. So you could cut down a 12 by 12 piece and use that to line the interior of this piece, you would have a 1/4 of an inch gap all the way around. And actually, it might be a little bit more than that, because when you calculate the burnishing that goes on in here, you actually lose a little bit. So for a size this size, I'm actually going to do a multi-piece liner, and you can use pattern paper for that, or you can use solid color cardstock. I'm going to go ahead and do a solid color cardstock piece here. I may follow it up with pattern paper later, but just for this example, I'm going to do solid color cardstock, and we're going to do a 3-piece liner. For the interior cover, I'm going to take this piece that we cut off from over here, and we're going to use that to cover first the spine section. And to calculate what we need to cover the spine section, the width is going to be the width of the spine plus the gaps. So that's 2 plus 1/4 plus 1/4, so we're at 2.5. And I'm going to go 1 inch on either side. So 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 inches. So we need a piece that's 4.5 inches wide, and I'm going to go 1/4 of an inch shorter than the entire height of the album. So 4.5 by 6 1/4. So we're going to cut it to 4.5 inches wide by 6 1/4, or 6 3/4, sorry. 6 3/4 inches tall. And I'm going to add double-sided tape all the way around the edge. This is to help make sure that the entire edge catches all the way around. This prevents some bubbling issues and rippling and other things that you don't want happening in your album cover. And before I pull up any release paper, I'm going to add glue to the cardstock piece. And now we're going to pull up all this release paper. Again, these release papers, this double-sided tape is going to make sure that we don't have bubbling here, 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 or here. And this release paper is going to make, or this double-sided tape is going to make sure that the edges of the cover get stuck down real good. And the glue is just going to add additional strength. So we're going to eyeball the center from side to side, top to bottom. We know we want about 1/8 of an inch gap because we went 1/4 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch shorter than the overall height. And we're going to burnish this down all the way around the edge and here in the center. I'm going to make sure that gets burnished down real good because we don't want this popping up on us. And if you want to see an example of what can happen if you don't have it stuck down real good right here on either side of the gap, be sure and check out that video. 5 mini album cover mistakes. Okay, now we're going to flex it again. Watch for any bubbling. Since we have the double-sided tape down, we can just burnish it and it'll catch. Now we're going to add the 2 pieces on either side. And normally this would be pattern paper, but for just the sake of completing the cover, we're going to go ahead and add white cardstock. And the measurements for this are going to be the same height as the cover for the spine here. So it's going to be 6 3/4 inches tall. And the width is going to be 1/4 inch shorter than the width of each of these cover pieces. So 4 3/4. 4 3/4 by 6 3/4. And we need 2 of those. For these, I'm not going to worry about adding double-sided tape to the album cover. There's nowhere on the album cover that there's going to be flexion or anything that these things are going to be covering. So we can just put double-sided tape down all the way around the outer edges of both pieces and then add glue to the center. I find it easiest to place pieces like this if I put the long edge toward me and then just guide the corners down. And make sure that I've got opposing corners where I want them. And then press down. Now we're going to repeat this for the back. And again, watching the opposing corners and getting those in position before pressing down. And voila, we have a mini album cover. This video is going to go live on January 25th, 2021, along with the 5 mini album cover mistakes. If you'd like to see what I'm going to do with this album, be sure you subscribe to my channel because the flip through of the final album is going to go live on January 28th. So be sure and subscribe to my channel, ring the bell so that you get notified when new videos go live. And I release new mini album related videos every Tuesday and Friday. If you have any questions, leave me a comment in the comment section down below, and I'll leave links to the materials and supplies that I used for this album cover in the description box down below. We'll see you guys in a couple of days. Bye.